Today, we're going to pop the hood on the Australian economy. We're going to look for the real engine, the one that actually drives our booms and our busts. And I think you might be surprised by what we find.
So let's just start with that big question. What really powers our economy? What keeps the wheels turning, creates jobs, and keeps everything moving forward? It's a simple question, but the answer most of us have in our heads, well, it might only be half the story.
Usually, when you talk about the economy, the conversation lands on two things, right? First, there's government spending. Big infrastructure projects, public services. And then there's business growth, all the incredible innovation and expansion from our companies. And look, both of those are absolutely vital. But there's this third, much, much larger force at play, one that's kind of working away just beneath the surface.
To really get this, we've got to ask a more basic question. Where does money even come from? As it turns out, our economy has two completely separate taps that create it.
Okay, so tap number one is the government. It creates money when it spends. But there's a second tap, and this one is way, way bigger, and that's the private banking system. The money that flows from this tap has a massive, and I mean massive, impact on all of our economic lives.
This is what some economists call credit money. And this is the absolute key to the whole thing. When a bank gives you a loan, it's not just handing over someone else's savings that's been sitting in a vault. No, it is creating brand new money, brand new spending power that simply did not exist a moment before.
The way it works is honestly almost shockingly simple. Say you get approved for a home loan. The bank doesn't go and find that cash somewhere. It just types the numbers into your account. And boom, a new deposit appears. That deposit is new money.
So let's just let that sink in for a second. Bank lending isn't just shuffling existing money from one person to another. It is actively pumping brand new spending power into the entire economy. And once you get that, it's a total game changer for understanding how our economy actually functions.
And this brings us right to the engine itself. You could call it the debt demand engine.
See, the total amount of spending happening in our economy isn't just our combined income, what we call GDP. The real formula is our income plus the change in all that new debt being created by the banking system. This simple little equation, it's the key to everything. So think about it. What happens when that change in new debt part of the equation is getting bigger? It means the total amount of spending in the economy is growing faster than what we're all earning. That's extra fuel in the tank. It creates demand, it creates jobs, it's the engine that drives economic booms.
But, and this is a really big but, the engine works in reverse too. When people and businesses start to slow down their borrowing, or they start paying back debt faster than they take on new loans, well, that change in new debt part turns negative. Total spending then drops, sometimes really fast, even if our paychecks haven't changed at all. And that is what can kick off a bust.
Okay, so that's the theory. How does this apply to us here in Australia? Well, honestly, Australia is the perfect case study. Our economic story for the past 40 years is fundamentally a story about private debt.
For decades, Australia has been on one of the biggest and longest private debt runs in the world. We went from pretty normal levels back in the 80s to a massive acceleration in the 90s, to the point where today, our private debt levels are now among the highest on the planet. So, what is all this borrowed money being used for? Well, if you live here, you can probably take a pretty good guess. The overwhelming majority of it, about 2/3, is tied up in housing. You just can't separate the story of Australian private debt from the story of the Australian property market.
Now, this whole situation is a real double-edged sword. On one side, this constant river of new mortgage money has propped up spending and kept the economy humming along even when our wages haven't really been going anywhere. But the other side of that sword, it's made us incredibly fragile. It means Australian households are now hypersensitive to even tiny shifts in interest rates or the job market. And because of that fragility, we have to be really careful about what kind of economic downturn we might face in the future. Because you know what? Not all slowdowns are the same.
So you might hear about a credit crunch. That's often just a temporary freeze-up. The banks get nervous, they stop lending for a bit, but then things can bounce back. Deleveraging, that's a different beast entirely. That's when people and businesses make a long-term, conscious decision to get out of debt. And that creates this massive long-term drag on spending that even super low interest rates can't seem to fix.
Now, think about the last time the economy hit a rough patch. What were all the headlines about? They were probably focused on the government, right? Specifically, all the public money being spent to try and fix things. But if we use this new lens we've been talking about, we can see what's really going on.
That spike in public spending, it's almost always a response to the real problem, which is that the private borrowing engine has stalled. When people and businesses stop borrowing and spending, the government is often the only one left to step in and fill that hole. It's the firefighter, not the arsonist.
So the big takeaway here is that we really need a new way to look at the economy. We need a new lens that puts the focus squarely on what's happening with private debt.
And here's a simple toolkit you can use yourself. First, keep an eye on the private debt-to-GDP ratio. Think of that as our long-term fragility meter. Second, watch the rate of credit growth. That tells you about the economy's speed right now. And third, and this might be the most important one, watch the change in that growth rate. Is it speeding up or slowing down? That's your early warning system for big turns in the economy. This quote really just sums the whole thing up perfectly. Here in Australia, we've been incredibly successful at avoiding a big crash for a very, very long time. But that success doesn't mean we've solved the underlying problem. It could just mean that our entire system has become structurally dependent on that engine of ever-growing private debt to keep going.
And that leaves us with a final, pretty challenging question to think about. After all these decades being powered by this hidden engine, is the Australian economy genuinely stable and strong? Or is it resting on a foundation that's become dangerously fragile? The answer to that is going to shape all of our futures. Thanks for joining me.